So what do you think branding is?
Oh, just a way to make your brand, for people to recognise your brand, I guess.
Gives you an assurance that it is good in quality.
A really simple way of sending a simple message.
So someone can identify with the company, I suppose. It relates to like us as consumers.
Where you pay more for branding. It can signify quality.
Labels, I suppose, that people follow. Well, just it's marketing. It's creating a style and an image that to associate with.
It has to be quite a long time. It's not like a very, very short time we just established it.
It's a name to a product.
So at the top of your head, can you think of any 3 famous brands that you know?
Sony, Levi's and Nike.
Calvin Klein.
Gucci,
Apple,
KFC, Pepsi,
Coca-Cola, McDonald's.
Mattel, Armani,
Prada, Nike, Adidas.
Ford.
Microsoft,
Nike,
Alas.
Ray-Ban.
Versace,
Cadbury.
Dolce & Gabbana.
The average person is exposed to over 3,000 advertisements a day. That's 84,000 a month on almost 2 million different products competing for your attention each and every year. In this hectic marketplace, it is almost impossible to make a decision on what to buy. So we put our faith and our money in something more than a single product. We put them in a brand.
Branding is what you do to cows to make sure so you know which owner who owns them.
In today's society, there's a trend towards overexposing consumers to branding. Many people believe that a brand is nothing more than a product name, something to help a consumer tell one product from another. But branding is much more than that. Just like you, me, and everybody else, a brand has a personality, and it's that personality that consumers are really buying into when they make a purchase.
When brands started, where they were purely a tool, a way to identify things, right? It was actually branding. So in many ways you may say that brands started when you started branding animals to define a sense of ownership, who owned those animals or pottery. And this has been fundamentally the way brands are started. Interestingly though, in the last, let's say, probably 20, 30 years, in many ways the role of brands has changed. It's still about identifying something, providing a clear sense of ownership about something, but more and more brands are starting getting some additional meanings. It's not so much what you see that matters when it comes to the brand, so that symbol, that logo, those colors, but more and more when we talk about brand is more about what is the idea behind. What those people who created that brand were trying to achieve, to say by creating that brand. So more and more it's becoming something more abstract, more conceptual, is more about the idea.
And how about this one?
Yeah, it's Apple.
that's Apple.
Apple? Nah.
Apple.
Apple?
Apple.
So when you think about, let's say, a brand that everybody's familiar with, Apple, what is really Apple as a brand? Is it just that logo? Well, not really. It's more that message about creativity, playfulness. That is really the Apple brand.
With seemingly endless choices at our fingertips, why is it that we pick some brands and not others? Why do most fail? And what makes the successful brands successful? Take companies such as Rolex, Volkswagen, and Levi. They've been around for decades upon decades, but why? What have these companies achieved to ensure their longevity that many of their competitors have not?
They are successful because behind those brands there is a clear idea, okay, what they stand for. There is also a very clear ability to understand what people really want, but not just listening to people and asking them what you want. More and more today, the successful brands are brands that are able to create a sort of conversation, a sort of dialogue. with their audience, with their consumers.
Does branding influence your decision into buying stuff like food or retail?
Yeah, definitely. Oh, some things yes, some things no. Certain foods, yeah. Clothing, yeah, definitely.
I won't buy a thing if it's not branded. It's just simple because you expect that value which you can see, which is built into the product and the research that goes into it.
Insofar as it typifies the quality and price expectations, you know, and the reliability. So, you know, there are things that I know I like because I either like the style or I know that it's a reliable product and will work for me.
I always thought you get what you paid for, and the brand products may be more expensive, but it really lasts a long time.
Okay, I'm going to show you a few samples of branding. What do you think this is?
Red Bull?
Is it Red Bull?
Oh, that's Red Bull, isn't it?
Red Bull.
Yeah.
That would be your Red Bull.
Red Bull.
What do you think this brand is?
Scotland.
In many ways, we live in a very crowded world, right? So all of us, in everything we do, in all the choices that we need to make, we need to have references around us, right? There are so many offers, so many experiences, so many people, so many companies. So branding is important because eventually we need to understand what's around us and eventually decide what we prefer over what. So that really makes branding important.
There are 4 different approaches to branding: corporate, family, individual, and personal. Each approach has a different aim and a different point of focus. In corporate branding, you'll find that typically the company is in fact the brand, and that the brand will encompass many different products. This is the type of model that Disney, IBM, and Microsoft use. There are many benefits to corporate branding, such as building customer loyalty, introducing new products into the marketplace, and advertising multiple products at the same time. Family branding, or umbrella branding, breaks up the company's product line by grouping them into portfolios which are then given their own distinctive brand. Take Microsoft, for instance. They have many different portfolios, one of them being the Xbox 360. Within that family, they sell the console, games, and accessories. By grouping these products together, they can advertise more products within the same campaign and introduce new products by building on the consumer's trust in a familiar brand. Individual branding is where a single product is the star of the show, even though it may be owned by a company that has many products. Take Procter & Gamble. Probably never heard of them, right? But I'm sure you've heard of the multiple different products in their range, such as Pampers, Gillette, and Pantene. Each product under the Procter & Gamble umbrella is given its own unique line and standalone power. A product isn't always something that sits on a shelf. A person can be a product, and a product a person. Let's look at personal branding, where a person with a well-established public image attaches their name and image to a product. Personal branding goes one step further than a celebrity simply endorsing the product. Instead, it actually has that person's name on the brand. Examples are Oprah Winfrey's O magazine, Paul Newman's pasta sauces, or Tiger Woods' clothing range. This makes the product and the personal brand inseparable. These different types of branding all have one thing in common: the goal of bringing consumers' attention to what is on offer.
Well, I mean, I suppose that with brand recognition here we mean brand awareness, being aware that these brands exist, understanding what a brand does. I mean, if we mean this with brand recognition, it's important because, well, as I said before, today we are surrounded by so many companies, so many products, so many brands. So, I mean, if you walk through the street, imagine just all the signs, messages that you see around you, right? Eventually, well, companies, brands want you to make a choice, to prefer them over their competitors. And the first step is for you to be aware that they exist.
Are there any brands that you're wearing right now?
Gucci, Gucci, Gucci.
I got Ray-Ban Sunnies, the Hurley top.
Jackets industry.
Nike, Lee.
Including an iPod? Yeah, 3.
Calvin Klein.
Probably everything.
Everything.
Probably.
I don't even know what brand underwear I'm wearing right now.
If I know the brand has got good quality, I'll buy it. It's not, and if I know, if it's got a story behind it, I might be influenced. Yeah, like if it's got something that's meaningful or, you know, it relates to a culture or something good, I might buy it.
The first and most important element of a brand is the product. A product is something to sell, whether that be a product, service, or an idea. The face of a brand on a basic level incorporates a brand name that is distinct and memorable, that attracts attention, that distinguishes itself from its competitors and hints at what the product does.
How about this brand?
That must be Coke. Yeah.
It's from Coke.
Coca-Cola.
That's a section of the Coca-Cola.
Coke. It's got lots of caffeine and sugar. It's Coke.
Oh, it is too.
Yeah, the C.
And the colour.
Yeah.
Also, what sends a message to consumers quickly and visually are elements such as what logo is being used. What is the logo saying? Is it sending a message of strength? Or is it a more playful message? Then have a look at what colours they are using. We associate colours with certain emotions and feelings. The fonts used also tell us about the brand and who the brand is for. The name of a brand, the logo, the colour scheme, and the font. All help to give the consumer an idea of what the brand is about and what the brand is trying to say.
Creating a brand is eventually about designing, it's about communication, it's creating a product. So something that you feel, you look, right? You can see, you can touch. But more and more importantly, when it comes to successful brand, is again, what was the thinking behind? What is the big thinking behind, right? So, because it's not so much the importance of a product there, but is that long-term vision about what are you really offering people or consumers, and what is the big story. So what makes a brand strong is the ability to create behind each brand a strategy, a big piece of thinking that makes sense and that can be delivered through the actual services and the products that a company provides.
Branding has changed significantly since the days of marking cattle for identification. Consumers are simply not looking for a product to perform a specific task anymore. They're looking for an experience, and a brand needs to sell that. They're looking for a brand with something to say, a message, and that message needs to reflect their views, their beliefs, and represent something about themselves personally. A brand isn't just the product anymore. It's about having a message and projecting that message to consumers. Not all products are physical entities that are purchased from retail outlets. Nonetheless, the process of branding is still the same, like in the case of a sports channel called One HD.
So typically what happens is that a client comes to us telling us, look guys, we have the opportunity to create a whole new channel, it's going to be free to air, and we have also decided that it's going to be dedicated to sport. What you do after that is, well, you have people in particular like me who would do a piece of strategy, trying to understand what do we want this brand to stand for? What is the story of this brand? In the case of One, we said, well, One should be all about sharing the love, the passion for sport, right? It's this sense of sharing. Once you created this idea, because a brand, first of all, is about an idea, after that you engage the designers. And so the designers will start developing the visual language of brand. And the visual language is about deciding about what colors do we want to associate with that brand? They would then work on the style of imagery. What images, what pictures, what photography treatment you can associate with that brand. They would also define a brand mark, right? And the brand mark is a very big challenge from a creative point of view, because it must be simple, short, but must already in that sign provide a story, an idea of what that brand is about, and you need to get it. So for instance, in the case of one, there is that sense of rounded horizon, this sense that is a little bit epic, but this sense of almost is the horizon that a community see, is the sun, you know, is this sense of coming together, right? On top of this, a designer would also define the typeface. What type of font you would use in communication, and maybe usually there is more than one for different purposes. After doing that, a designer would start bringing all these things together, and almost magically, all these things together, typeface and brand mark and photography and colors, they will start generated communication.
And how about this fashion brand?
The type font is in Calvin Klein, but it doesn't say Calvin Klein.
Yeah, well, it's this Calvin Klein. You got it right. Okay, cool. Are there any brands that you don't like, and if so, why?
Coca-Cola and McDonald's. They get people fat. They feed people up with sugar, rubbish. They target children.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not too keen on all global corporate brands when they start mucking about with cultures like Coca-Cola, and I'm not very keen on global brands because they're sort of homogenizing the world.
The values, beliefs and needs of society are constantly changing. For a brand to be successful over a period of time, it must evolve and give society what it wants or perceives that it needs. If a brand refuses to change, if it refuses to evolve, society will pick up on that, figure out that it has no need for it anymore, and move on to something else. For a brand to be successful, it needs to be relevant. If it isn't relevant, it won't appeal to consumers. And if it doesn't appeal to consumers, they won't buy the product. If nobody buys the product, then it won't be long before there is no product. Many of the world's most successful brands, such as Louis Vuitton, Coca-Cola, or BP, have been around for close to 100 years. For successful global companies such as these to stand the test of time, each of them, and many others like them, have evolved as society has developed.
Yes, Coca-Cola has changed. The formula of Coca-Cola has been around the same for decades, right? But in a way, the important thing for a brand to do is to be able to refine the idea, the message, to be in tune with how the society evolved. So there was a stage when Coca-Cola, let's say around and soon after the Second World War, was in many ways the American dream, right? Was about images of American soldiers to Europe, in Asia, bringing freedom, right? And in many ways the people were buying Coca-Cola because they wanted to buy in the American dream.
As society has changed over the years, so have many different types of brands in a variety of industries. One industry that has undergone a great deal of change over the past 50 years is the tobacco industry. During the 1960s, advertising campaigns reinforced the positive images of cigarette smoking. One of the most famous campaigns was Philip Morris's Marlboro line. They created a brand image of rugged cowboys and freedom that carried with it the slogan, "Come to where the flavour is, come to Marlboro country." The Marlboro Man campaign was so successful that it ran for 25 years. But 25 years on, society has changed. The dangers and impacts of tobacco smoking became a major social issue, and bans were implemented to restrict how the products could be advertised.
So what they are doing, often in a quite cheeky way, and I may not agree with them doing something like that, instead is if not they can't do it advertising, since they still need to have that brand recognition, they may have different forms of communication, right? And so this could be sponsorship, right? So you can see lots of tobacco brands sponsoring especially the Formula 1 Grand Prix. Big investment there, because in that case it's allowed for them to do that. But there are other very inventive in many ways tobacco brand like Marlboro, who has created a whole new line of clothes. It's a clothes brand. But eventually, does it really matter for them to sell clothes? No, it's just a matter for them to give visibility to their brand. Dunhill has done the same, becoming a quite interesting fashion brand in its own right. So in many ways they've tried to find other avenues to keep visibility behind their brand, but also by choosing to go into fashion, into perfumes, into Formula 1, also associating with their name different type of environments, different type of emotions, right? So the brands that have gone into Formula 1 is to suggest this idea of risk, masculinity, high life. Those that have gone more into fashion instead is to suggest an idea of class, lifestyle, elegance. So in many ways, well, they can't do advertising anymore, but they're basically doing the same thing in different manners.
Like if it's well advertised on TV and stuff, it makes me want to buy it because it's kind of like the thing to buy.
So does the brand of a product influence your decision into buying it?
Yeah, sometimes.
I'm quite anti-brand, so because I think branding is a bit of a brainwashing process, inveigling their way into your head.
But you love,
so I'm quite anti.
You love good quality stuff, and
No,
then
I
that
don't
ends up. But you often do. Like you see a nice car and you really like it. Just so happens that it's got a brand, so you end up liking a brand.
Creating a brand name, designing a logo, advertising a message. Does it all work? Do brands really influence what we buy? Of course they do. Branding not only informs our decisions about what we purchase, but it also sends a message about what it is we are purchasing. Without branding and the messages that brands convey through their communications, shopping would become more of a lucky dip. Branding is how the manufacturer communicates with consumers. It tells them what the brand is all about, what the associated values and beliefs are, and who the products are aimed at.
Brands influence people, but it's not a sort of top-down process. It's not only brands that bombard people with messages so to influence their behavior, because as we said before, really successful brands are also the brands that are able to listen to people, to really identify that there is a need, that there is a desire that they can fulfill. So it's really more of an iterative type of process.
Just as consumers can be influenced with what they buy, they can also be influenced about what not to buy. Not all brands are perceived by consumers in the way that the manufacturer thinks they are. Sometimes the public's perception of a brand can be very negative. This negative perception can occur for a range of reasons, such as a decline in a product's quality, the product becoming irrelevant, or a shift taking place in social and environmental norms that make the practices of a company outdated. Over the past decade, large companies such as Nike and McDonald's have taken major steps in changing their public image.
Well, because probably in many ways they were narrow-minded, right? Because they thought that all the promise, all the things that they had to do was purely related to an act of selling and buying their product. But in many ways they were not able to understand that for their own public was also very important to know what was behind the scenes. McDonald's, not so much how cheap, how good value that sandwich can be, but what are the ingredients that go into that sandwich? What is the farming market that produce such cheap meat? So it's important because more and more we are not behaving anymore as just consumers. We are happy to pay that price to get that product, and that's the end of the story. But we want to know more and more about these companies. How do they operate? What is the behind the scenes? They want to say that. And for many of these companies, that is a big challenge.
Manufacturers used to create brands through the use of print advertisements and television commercials, which would run consecutively for months or even years at a time. But those days are long gone. The creation of new media like the internet, mobile phones and texting, and social networking media have permanently transformed the way brands are created and used. New technology has created a totally different approach to ensuring that brands communicate with consumers, and more importantly, with the way consumers interact with brands.
In the past, brands were created by professionals, corporation, and usually their marketing team and external specialists. This is no longer valid because what you can see is that nowadays ordinary people, especially if they are young, even if they are not professionals in the sector of branding, they create brands. They are able to create brands. They are able to create logos. They are able to create expression of their selves, their identities, of what they do, that you may describe. This is branding. So in many ways, brands are going everywhere, and everyone is creating brands.
So brands are becoming more and more relevant to businesses, and what they mean to consumers is becoming increasingly complex. With high-speed global communications technology controlling brands, image making and marketing are becoming the critical business challenges of the 21st century.